While reading my son's will, my daughter-in-law hissed ominously, "You won't get anything out of the 70 million." The lawyer read the will. Not a word about me, only her triumph. But suddenly, a man ran into the room and shouted, "Don't believe them. It's a conspiracy." My daughter-in-law began to get nervous. Her face contorted. You won't believe what happened 5 minutes later. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The phone rang sharp through the afternoon silence, cutting through my peaceful Tuesday like a blade through silk. I sat down the Tribune's business section and reached for the receiver, expecting another telemarketer or maybe Jimmy calling about our weekend golf plans. "Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Richardson from Northwestern Memorial." The voice carried that careful, professional tone. "Doctor's perfect for delivering terrible news. I'm sorry to inform you, but your son Ronald passed away today at 1:15 p.m. The newspaper slipped from my lap, pages scattering across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves. My hand gripped the receiver so tight, my knuckles went white. "Passed away." The words bounced around my skull without landing anywhere that made sense. "What do you mean passed away?" My voice sounded foreign, smaller than it should. He was responding to treatment. "You said the new protocol was working." "Sir, I understand this is shocking. The cancer had spread more aggressively than we anticipated. He went peacefully with minimal pain. I'm truly sorry for your loss." Minimal pain, as if that mattered now. As if anything mattered now. The grandfather clock in the corner kept ticking its steady rhythm, oblivious to the fact that my world had just collapsed. Through the window, cars moved down Oak Park Avenue like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I hung up without saying goodbye and stared at the silent phone. Ronald was gone. My brilliant, stubborn, idealistic son who'd built a tech empire from his garage was gone. The boy who'd once spent 3 hours explaining why capitalism needed ethical guidelines was gone. My legs felt unsteady as I stood. I needed to call Vivienne. She had to know. Maybe she could explain this away. Tell me the doctor was wrong, that this was all some horrible mistake. I dialed her number with shaking fingers. It rang twice before her voice answered, bright and casual. "Marvin, this is unexpected." I could hear salon noise in the background. Hair dryers humming, women chattering. She was getting her nails done while her husband lay dying. "Vivienne, I just got a call from Dr. Richardson." My throat felt raw. "About Ronald." The background noise suddenly seemed louder, more obscene. How could she be at a spa when our son was fighting for his life? When our son was, "Yes, he's dead." Her voice cut through my thoughts like a scalpel, clinical and cold. "And before you start with your grieving father routine, let me make something crystal clear. You won't get a penny of the 70 million. Everything Ronald had is mine now." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. She knew. She'd known he was dead, and hadn't called me, hadn't called his father. And her first thought, her only thought was money. Are you serious right now?" Heat flooded my chest, pushing up through my throat. "My son just died, and you're talking about money." "My husband just died," she corrected, her tone sharp as broken glass. "And unlike you, I understand what that means legally. Ronald's will is very clear about who inherits what." The afternoon shadows had grown longer while we'd been talking. The house felt different now. Emptier, like all the air had been sucked out. Photos of Ronald at various ages stared down at me from the mantel. Graduation day, his wedding, the last Christmas before his diagnosis, when he'd still looked healthy. "How can you be so cold?" I whispered into the phone. "How can you be so naive?" She shot back. "This is the real world, Marvin. Money doesn't wait for grief." I stared at the receiver after she hung up, listening to the dial tone. In the span of 20 minutes, I'd lost my son and discovered the true nature of the woman he'd married. The woman who'd stood beside him in churches and hospitals, who'd promised to love him in sickness and in health. The clock kept ticking. Traffic kept moving outside, and somewhere in a cold hospital room my son lay still while his widow calculated her inheritance at a nail salon. I set the phone down carefully and looked around my empty house. Tomorrow there would be funeral arrangements, and lawyers and all the brutal machinery of death. Tonight there was just this crushing silence, and the terrible knowledge that the woman who'd taken my son's name had never deserved it. My finger hovered over the redial button. Rage was building in my chest, hot and purposeful. Vivian thought she could dismiss me. Dismiss Ronald's memory with her talk of wills and money. She was about to learn otherwise. My finger pressed redial with deliberate force. The rage had settled into something harder now, more focused. Grief could wait. This couldn't. The phone rang once before she answered, her voice still carrying that casual confidence. What now, Marvin? How dare you think about money when my son just died? The words exploded out of me. Years of watching her manipulate Ronald compressed into pure fury. How dare you? Your son was my husband, she interrupted, voice rising to match mine. And everything he built, everything he earned, everything he suffered for. It's all mine now. Not yours. Mine. I paced across the living room, my free hand clenching and unclenching. The photos on the mantel watched me like silent witnesses. Ronald at 10, gap-toothed and proud of his science fair trophy. Ronald at 25, arm around Vivian on their wedding day, both of them glowing with what I'd foolishly believed was love. You didn't even call me, I said, my voice dropping to something darker. Your husband died, and you went to get your nails done instead of calling his father. I had appointments. Her tone was dismissive, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Besides, what was the point? You would have just rushed to the hospital and made a scene. I handled it professionally. Professionally. I stopped pacing. He was your husband, not a business transaction. Everything is a business transaction, Marvin. That's something you never taught him. But life did. Ronald learned to think like a businessman in the end. That's why his will is so comprehensive. There it was again, the will. She kept coming back to it like a vulture circling carrion. I thought about Ronald during his final months, how withdrawn he'd become, how he'd stopped taking my calls as often. I'd attributed it to the cancer, the treatments, the depression that comes with facing mortality. But maybe it had been something else. Maybe he'd finally seen through her mask. You couldn't even pretend to grieve for 5 minutes, I said. Grief is a luxury I can't afford. Do you have any idea how much debt the treatments left us in? How much money we spent on experimental procedures, and private doctors and flying to Switzerland for some miracle cure that didn't work? Her voice was getting shriller. I sacrificed everything for him, and now I'm going to collect what I'm owed. What you're owed. The words tasted bitter. You abandoned him. I saw how often you visited during chemotherapy. I counted the days between your hospital appearances. I was protecting our assets. Someone had to think practically while you and Ronald were playing out some tragic father-son fantasy. Someone had to ensure there would be something left when the medical bills were paid. The line went quiet except for our breathing. Through the window I watched a neighbor walking his dog, the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon continuing while my world burned down. That dog probably showed more loyalty than the woman on the other end of this call. You never loved him, I said finally. Love doesn't pay bills, Marvin. Love doesn't secure futures. Love is what naive people believe in before life teaches them better. Her voice had gone cold again. Surgical. Ronald figured that out eventually. Why do you think he rewrote his will 3 times in the last year? The words hit like a physical blow. 3 times. Ronald had been planning something, changing something, and I'd been completely unaware. How many conversations had I missed? How many signs had I ignored while focusing on treatment schedules and doctor appointments? You're a monster, I whispered. I'm a realist, and tomorrow at the funeral, you'll see exactly how realistic I can be. Don't even think about challenging me. Old man, I have lawyers you can't afford and documentation you can't dispute. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the dead phone, my ears ringing with her words. The house felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Outside, the neighbor had disappeared around the corner with his dog, leaving the street empty. I slammed the phone down hard enough to make the end table shake. A photo of Ronald's college graduation fell over, and I reached out to straighten it automatically. His young face smiled up at me, full of hope and certainty about the future. He'd been so proud that day, so eager to change the world through technology and ethical business practices. The silence stretched out around me, heavy and expectant. Tomorrow I would have to face her again in public while we buried my son. She would stand there in expensive black, playing the grieving widow while calculating her windfall. She would accept condolences from people who had no idea what she really was. But tonight, in this quiet house full of memories, I made a promise to that young man in the graduation photo. Vivian Bennett thought she had won. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains like it had every day for the past 15 years. But today everything felt different. I lay still for a moment, letting yesterday's reality settle into my bones again. Ronald was gone. Vivian had shown her true colors, and today I would have to face both truths in public. I sat up slowly, joints protesting the movement. Sleep had been elusive, filled with fragments of phone calls and memories of Ronald as a boy. The house felt impossibly quiet without the possibility of his weekly check-in calls. No more, "Hey Dad, how's retirement treating you?" No more updates about his latest business ventures or complaints about experimental treatments. The coffee maker gurgled to life on its timer, a small mercy of routine in a world gone sideways. I shuffled to the kitchen, poured a cup and stood at the window watching Chicago wake up. Traffic was already building on the expressway in the distance, people heading to jobs, to lives that hadn't been shattered by a phone call yesterday afternoon. My black suit hung in the closet like a uniform for grief. The last time I'd worn it was for Margaret's funeral 3 years ago. The fabric felt heavier now as I lifted it out, weighted with the memory of standing graveside while rain drummed on the umbrella above my head. Margaret would have known what to do about Vivian. She'd always been better at reading people, better at seeing through polished surfaces to the rot beneath. I dressed carefully, adjusting the tie until it sat properly. The mirror reflected a man I barely recognized, older, grayer, with new lines around the eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Grief aged you instantly, I was learning. One phone call and suddenly you looked every one of your 68 years. The photo albums were stacked in the living room bookshelf, and I found myself pulling out the most recent one. Ronald's illness was documented there in brutal honesty. The gradual weight loss, the way his smile became more forced as treatments failed, the hollow look that settled into his eyes during the final months.